Okay, we're going to review quiz 11. First, we'll hit the key points of chapter 11. In chapter 11, we are reviewing terminological rules, and there are two. The first rule is that there must be 3 and only 3 terms in your syllogism. The second rule says the middle term must not occur in the conclusion. It's a key thing in chapter 11. Now let's flip on. We're going to look at this syllogism, which is the first one on the quiz. So let's examine this particular syllogism. I'll try to do this in color. All right, let's find our major and minor terms and middle terms, and then our major premise and our minor premise. Our major term is, of course, the predicate of your conclusion. So this is your major one. We call P for predicate, and we also see that it's up here. So right off the bat, we know which one is our major premise. And this is the major premise right here, the first one. Okay, what is our minor term? Remember, the minor term is the one that is the subject of your conclusion. And we see that it is also right here. So the minor premise now is this one, because it is the one that contains the minor term. So the last thing we need to do is identify the middle term. So what's left? We've taken out felines and mammals. Now we have a problem, because we see we have lions and wildebeest. We have 2 separate nouns left. I think I'm violating one of the rules. Which rule am I violating? Well, let's flip back and look at our 2 rules again. The first rule says I can have 3 and only 3 terms. The second one says the middle term must not occur in the conclusion. Well, I am violating this rule, 3 and only 3 terms, because in actuality, we end up having 4 terms. I see 4 nouns here, my major and minor, and then I have 2 here. So I'm violating rule number 1. So this particular syllogism is invalid, because it violates rule 1. Okay, let's look at this second. This is actually the third syllogism on your quiz. I'm skipping the second one because I think it's pretty straightforward. But let's go look at this one. A lot of you guys were tripped up on this one. All right, so let's dissect this. First thing we need to do is find our major and minor terms. Our major term, again, is the predicate of the conclusion. So it's drying out. Can you still see that? Oh, sort of. Let's try this one. Ah, better. Okay, so this is the major term because it is the predicate. So this is the major term, and we also now know that this is the major premise. All right, what about the minor term? The minor term is going to be the subject of the conclusion. So that's this one. So this is S, and I see it's also here. So I now know the second premise. This is the minor premise. Right, so the third thing I need to find is the conclusion, the middle term. So middle term, I see I have mice and mice. So that would be the middle term. So does it agree with rule number 1, 3 and only 3 terms? Ah, be careful here. This one's a little bit tricky. At first you would think, yes, it does only have 3 terms. Computer parts, those are together taken as 1 term. Cheese, which is another term, and mice. But that's not actually the same. Come up here and look here. Mice eat cheese. The mice here, well, you know, this is mice as in little animals, right? But what about this? Here, is it referring to mice as in the little squeaky animal with whiskers? It's referring to the little mouse pad from your computer. This is a case of equivocation. We have the words that are spelled the same, pronounced the same, but they do not mean the same thing. Here it's an animal, here it's a computer part. So am I violating Rule 3? I actually am, because I have 4 terms here. I have my major, my minor, and I actually have 2 other terms here. So this violates Rule 1, and it is called the fallacy of equivocation. Equivocation. Because the mice I have up here is not the same as the word mice that I have here. They look the same, they sound the same, they are not the same thing. So it is not a valid conclusion. This syllogism is invalid because it violates Rule 1. Violates Rule 1 because of the fallacy of equivocation. Okay, let's move on to another one. Okay, let's dissect this one. This is actually the second syllogism on quiz 11. I was going to skip it, but I decided to go ahead and go through it after all. The first 2 we went through were invalid, so I wanted to go through and talk about this one. So let's look at it. First of all, let's identify our major term. Our major term is going to be the predicate of the conclusion. Now, you actually have to be very careful here. Most of you were just putting God, and you were saying this was your major term. But let's actually talk about grammar for a second. This is actually in a prepositional phrase. Okay? What you're trying to find is 2 things that are set to be equal in here. They're saying Gabriel is equal to what? In this conclusion, what are they saying Gabriel is equal to? They're not saying Gabriel is equal to God. That's not what it's trying to say at all. It's trying to say Gabriel is a thing created by God. There's a word that was inferred in here. It was inferred, but not actually written in. So I could rewrite this sentence to actually say, therefore Gabriel is, I should probably put it here. Therefore, Gabriel is a thing created by God. Now that makes more sense, right? That's what this sentence is trying to say. It's trying to say Gabriel is equal to a thing created by God. They weren't trying to say Gabriel was the same as God. They were trying to say that Gabriel is a thing created by God. So what would my major term be in this case? This is actually my major term here. It's not God, it's thing created by God, or things created by God. It's saying that if you have this full set here of all the things that are created by God, Gabriel is one of those things within that set. Okay? So you have to really think about what you're writing there. Think of it visually. For those of you that were saying this was the case, that God was the predicate, then what you're saying is, here's my set of all things that are God, and inside is Gabriel. In other words, Gabriel is a subset of the set of things that are God. No, that's not what it was trying to say at all. This is actually pretty common. I wrote this out on a lot of your guys' quizzes. So watch that. That was tripping up a lot of you. Okay, so I'm going to erase this here because it took up a lot of space. So our major term is not God. Our major term is the inferred things created by God. So this is actually our major term. And then, of course, it would be inferred up here as well. Things created by God. So that is our major term. So this is our major term. Then which is our major premise? Well, it's going to be this first one because it contains the major premise. All right. What is our minor term? Well, our minor term is pretty easy. The minor term is the subject of the conclusion, and there's nothing tricky about that. That is the subject of our conclusion. That's our minor term. Therefore, this is the minor premise. All right, so what's left? What's left should be the middle term. And I have angel and I have angel. Now, it's the same word. Let's just do a double check here that we're not having an equivocation. Does the word angel mean the same thing in both cases? Yes, it actually does. So my middle term is angel. So let's check the two rules. What were my two rules again? Must have three and only three terms, and the middle term must not occur in the conclusion. That's kind of getting wiped away. Let's check. Rule number 1, does it have three and only three terms? 1, we take all of this together as a group. So 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms. Check. Rule number 1 is good. Rule number 2, the middle term must not occur in the conclusion. Here's our middle term. It is not in the conclusion. So this syllogism is valid. Yay, because rule number 1 was okay, and rule number 2 was okay. So that's the only syllogism on quiz 11 that was valid.